everyone. Welcome. Just testing my video and audio. If someone could write in the chat and let me know that you can hear and see me, that would be great. Thank you, Jen. We're going to give folks a couple of minutes. The session starts at about 1:40, so we'll just wait for others to join us. Hi, Devon. Thank you.
Hello, of course.
Devon, if you could put the first slide up, that would be great. There we go. So just a reminder to folks as they're joining, on your screen, you can double click the PowerPoint presentation to enlarge it if you want to see it more closely. You could also double click on my face if you really want to look at that. You have the option to make the PowerPoint presentation bigger. Hi, Sue. Welcome. I'm going to introduce the session a little bit, and then I'll bring you onto the screen. So just hang tight. All right, folks. I'm going to get us started here. It's 1:40 by my watch. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel on equity considerations in distance learning. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. Just like all the other sessions you've been to, the lines are muted and your screens are turned off, except for the two amazing panelists who I'll bring on shortly. There's going to be a moderated Q&A section at the end of the panel. And so if you have a question, you can either submit it into the chat or you can request to share your video. We'll see if you can ask it directly to the panelists. The session's going to go till 2:25, and then we'll all transition back to the main stage for a fireside chat with Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, which I'm so excited about, and a closing with John King, who always leaves us feeling inspired and ready to work. Hi, Mary. All right, well, let's get started. Devon, could you advance to the next slide? Thank you. So let's just start with a little bit of context that I think we all know too well because we're living it every day. Across the country, many districts and schools have moved learning completely or partially online for at least this semester, if not longer. 50 million K-12 public school students are learning remotely, and research shows that high poverty districts are more than twice as likely to be starting remotely this fall compared to more affluent districts. Next slide, please, Stefan. To succeed in a virtual learning environment, there are a lot of things that kids need. I was thinking about this actually as I was setting up for this presentation. What a lifeline my computer is and my internet is. Students have to have access to their own device. They have to have reliable high-speed internet. They have to have technical support and repairs because a Chromebook is only so good as a Chromebook if the Chromebook works. And they have to have a safe and supportive space to connect to virtual learning opportunities. But in so many communities, especially communities of color and low-income communities, students lack access to these basic technological resources that they absolutely need in order to connect to virtual learning. A study from Common Sense Media showed that 1 in 4 Latino students and nearly 1 in 3 Black students lack adequate connectivity to take advantage of the virtual learning that their schools are providing. Next slide, please, Devon. Once students and families have what they need to connect, technologically speaking, research and experience show that strong relationships with caring adults and educators are key to keeping them engaged and attending school. A computer and internet's just not enough. The thing is that even before the pandemic, more than 8 million students across the country missed so much school every year that they're at risk of falling behind academically. Black, Latino, Native, and Pacific Islander students in particular are even more likely to be chronically absent. And with so many students learning remotely, schools and districts and our states are going to have to do more to ensure that all students feel welcomed and supported so that they log on every day. There is a real risk that this pandemic and the school closures and the challenges posed by it are going to exacerbate inequities in our education system. And that's despite the extraordinary efforts by so many teachers and school counselors and administrators and district and state leaders. But without even more action, those inequities that we know exist in our system could get so much worse. But of course, the question is, how do we as education advocates prevent that from happening? And that's why you're all here today. So I'm very excited to introduce 2 amazing panelists for our conversation who are going to help us answer that question. I'm going to invite them to join me on the screen. So I see Sue here, so I'm going to bring you on. And Karen, if you want to click the share audio blue button, I can bring you on. Looks like Karen might not be here yet. Karen, if you're in the chat and having trouble joining us, just let me know. Well, I'll do my introductions in the meantime. So we have 2 panelists today. We have Sue, who's just joined us. Sue Fothergill joins us from Attendance Works, where she's the Director of Strategic Programming. Is that right? And she coordinates policy work at the federal and state level. Prior to Attendance Works, she worked at the Family League of Baltimore and the ACLU of Maryland. And hopefully in a second, we're going to have Karen Cater joining us. She's the president and CEO of Digital Promise, a leading voice in transforming education through technology, innovation, and research. Prior to leading Digital Promise, Karen was the director of the Office of Educational Technology at the U.S. Department of Education. And I'm also very excited to say that the president and CEO of Attendance Works, Hetty Chang, is also in the chat, and so she's there as a resource for us as well. I'm not sure where Karen is. Hopefully we will be able to find her, but I'm going to jump in because we have Sue here, and I want to make sure we get a chance to hear and learn from her. So Sue, I'm going to skip my initial question that I had for Karen. Hopefully when she joins us, she can talk a little bit about this access to technology question. But what I'd love to ask you, Sue, even before the pandemic, as I mentioned, so many students, 8 million, were missing a lot of school, so much that they were falling behind academically. And students of color and students from low-income backgrounds are even more likely to be chronically absent. So I'd love for you to talk to us about what can districts and states do to support schools in improving attendance, especially for our most vulnerable students, while school is virtual.
So first, I just want to say thank you to Education Trust for organizing such an awesome couple of days of learning. I've been participating on your panels and attending the plenary, and I've learned a lot in this time with you all and all the excellent presenters you've brought on board. So I'm excited to be able to share the information that I have, and I just want to say thank you to Allison and your extended team. So first, I just want to acknowledge that we've done more in the past 3 months to close the digital divide than we've done in the past 3 years. And so I just want to take a moment to say that, and I really reflect on something I heard John King say the other day in another panel that I was watching, where he said crisis can be the catalyst for change. And I do believe that in this moment, even as Black and brown children, children who live in poverty, and children who are otherwise vulnerable have been in crisis for forever, right? Since the inception of this country, that this pandemic has exacerbated those crises and made those realities, exacerbated the vulnerabilities of those children. And it's my fervent hope that in this moment, in this particular crisis, that it becomes the catalyst for change for all of us in our collective resolve to commit to ending the inequities that exist in our public school system. And so to your point, Allison, like what can states and districts do as it relates to ensuring that students are showing up every day? Well, the first thing we have to make sure that is happening is that we're actually taking attendance. And so what happened this past spring when school buildings closed is that we stopped taking attendance for a lot of different reasons, some of them even policy appropriate. So for example, there are certain states that rely on average daily attendance to determine funding levels for schools. And so in that moment of chaos and crisis, schools stopped taking attendance, and we just wiped the board clean for those those couple of months at the end of the school year. Well, as we've looked at the plans coming into this school year for the 50 states across this country, or the legislation that is passed for COVID-19 as it relates to education, while 38 states have indicated or paid attention to attendance in their plans, only 14 of them require daily attendance taking. When we don't track which students are showing up, we're more likely to miss where inequities exist. We're more likely to be unable to respond with the appropriate resources. So for example, if a student's not showing up because they don't have access to a computer or don't have access to the internet, if we're not tracking that data, we can't even begin to identify where the problem is. And then we also, it inhibits our ability to hold policymakers accountable to responding to the inequities that we're finding when we don't have the data. Additionally, I would say that states, so in response to that, states can begin by requiring that we have daily attendance taking, and that also they provide districts and schools with guidance about how to do that, so that there are definitions and protocols for tracking attendance across all modes of learning, whether that's synchronous, asynchronous, or remote, so that we're collecting all of that data. And that at the state and district level, in addition to collecting data about whether students are showing up or not showing up in whatever form of learning is happening, that we at this moment have to expand what kind of data we're collecting and really think about access to learning as part of that data. So up-to-date contact information. Do schools have up-to-date contact information for 100% of their families? And then also collecting at an individual student level, which students have computers, which students don't, which students have access to online, the internet, and then also which students might need additional support to access that technology even once we deliver it, as you pointed out just a moment ago, Allison. And so, so we have to make sure we're tracking attendance. We also have to expand our measures. And then finally, I would say we also have to rethink how we use data, so that it's important to collect it, it's important to track it, but how we use it is just as important as well. And so attendance data really is about taking a problem-solving approach, using that data to identify and understand which students are struggling to show up to learn, and which groups of students are experiencing disproportionate inequities in their ability to access learning. And certainly and absolutely never to use attendance data to punish students for not being in school. And just recently we had an example that I think made national coverage, where a young lady by the name of Grace in Pontiac, Michigan, actually had her probation violated for not logging on to learning, when in fact she had a barrier to accessing online learning. So we really have to rethink how we use attendance data, move away from punishment, and move toward problem solving.
Thank you so much, Sue. Do you mind muting yourself for just a second? I'd love to know if there are examples of districts or states that you could share with us that you think are doing a better job at either collecting data that school leaders and policymakers know who is and isn't attending school, and also addressing chronic absenteeism problems in this new world we're in?
There are states that have certainly stepped up and are, I think, leading the way across the country. And two of them that come to mind immediately are both California and Connecticut. So California has passed legislation, in fact, in response to COVID-19 that requires daily attendance taking, and has also issued some guidance about what those expectations are. I would say that our organization thinks it's essential that in addition to taking daily attendance, that we're also differentiating between whether students are differentiating between what modes of learning students are engaged in, whether that's online or in person or otherwise. And I think that's where the California legislation falls slightly short. We know that Connecticut is issuing guidance and regulations around attendance taking as well, and has established the expectation that attendance be taken daily, and they are starting to dive into how do they differentiate and track data across the different modes of learning. And so there are leaders and in our country that have put forward different ideas and strategies with the expectation of daily attendance taking, and then there's still a lot of room to grow.
Thank you so much, Sue. Hi, Karen. I'm so glad you could join us. I feel like if any session is going to be understanding of the technological issues and the impact that those can have, it's this one. So we're so glad you're here.
Thank you. There are so many platforms for online. This one was, anyway, it's all good. I figured it out and we're here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Jump in then, if it's okay with you. I wanted to, I already introduced you, just so everyone hears it again. This is Karen Cater, the head of Digital Promise, one of our wonderful partners. And actually, I'll share at the end of the session some of the resources that our two organizations put together. So Karen, it would be great. Could you talk about, when I opened up the session, I framed it as talking about the digital divide and how so many students, in particularly communities of color and low-income communities, don't have consistent access to their own devices or reliable access to internet, which was always a problem, but is particularly an issue right now when so many students are learning remotely. Yeah. And I would love for you to talk about a little more about these issues related to home access and what you can share with advocates about promising practices that you've seen from states and districts across the country in getting those critical resources to the kids who need them.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, so the general digital divide has been something we've heard about for decades, actually. But more recently, the homework gap is what we've been talking about. And that is meaning that some students go home from school, even if they've access to technology in school, they go home from school and they can't do their homework, or they're doing it on a little phone or something like that. So the homework gap was introduced multiple years ago, but now with COVID school closures, the homework gap turned into the schoolwork gap. People without home access were unable to connect to their teachers and classmates, as well as the plethora of learning resources and learning opportunities. So it is very clear that equity means every single individual student, not sharing with a sibling or parent, must have a learning device, and every home must have internet access. We need 100% affordable broadband in homes, much like electricity, much like water. It's a critical utility for learning and for so much more. So that's kind of the bottom line, and where we need to get to is 100% affordable access. So obviously there are multiple parts to that. But starting kind of with a thing is devices. So districts have been systematically figuring out how to provide devices for all their students. They've been taking them off of carts, getting them ready, ordering them by the thousands, preparing them and checking them out to students with their food, with some other resources, et cetera. They have been figuring out how to get these out to students. One example most recently is the state of Mississippi is using some of their federal funds to fund a device for every single student in the state who wants one. That's huge. That is the state of Mississippi. It's the first state that we have seen that is taking this on as a statewide challenge and a statewide solution. So that's an important one to watch. So the device issue is challenging, but it is solvable. Home internet is trickier because it's an infrastructure issue, and the whole country, it's a big wide country. So in some very urban places, be infrastructure, there might be possible access, but it's not affordable. In very rural places, there may not be actual infrastructure or access. So there are multiple different challenges, and every district is going about this differently. What we are seeing some help coming from the large cellular providers like Verizon or T-Mobile or Sprint. And we're also seeing very promising, strong partnerships with local internet service providers and districts. So for example, just a small example, Middletown, Ohio, they are working with their internet service providers literally address by address to figure out who has children at home but doesn't have internet access. And then they're establishing a low cost, I want to say $15 a month or something like that, which actually is not minimal for a family out of work or whatever. So I don't want to minimize $15 a month. It still is a cost. But they're trying to get the costs as affordable as possible so students can use them for learning. So we're also seeing just a myriad other solutions, but really what it requires is as it is all the way down to the, district by district, then school by school, community by community, street by street, home by home, figuring out the ways to make sure that everybody has access. Also in Middletown, they also collected funds to sponsor students. So if a student's family could not afford their internet access, they have also funds to add. So I'll stop there. This is a big challenge, but 100% affordable broadband for every family in the country is important.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'll also, sorry, Karen, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself. Thanks. California's governor also issued an executive order asking the largest wireless providers in the state to get rid of data caps and overage charges, which I thought was another really powerful example of a way that a state can tackle this issue. I'd love to move on to talking to both of you about communication with families, students, and community. So, and I say this, as an Ed Trust employee and a parent, during these times that are evolving and uncertain, all families need accurate and reliable information about expectations for their students and the services and supports that they can access and how to access them and how the situation related to COVID-19 is changing and how that's going to impact their kids and their family. Unfortunately, we know that information from schools often does not get to all families, particularly the families of our most vulnerable students. So to both of you, and if we could start with Sue first, what's the most important thing when it comes to communication with families? And what have you seen states or districts do well to make sure that families receive that clear and accurate information about distance learning and access to resources that they need?
Thank you, Allison. So the most successful efforts that I've seen as it relates to communication with students and families, it's happening in places that have done the work to build and deepen and strengthen their relationships with the students and families they serve. And so I'm going to back into the answer about what districts and states can do by talking about a school site effort that Attendance Works through our partnerships identified, and just find such a profound example of the way a school can move in this moment. And so I just want to say, take for example, Middle School 50, El Puente Community School in Brooklyn, New York. Now, this is a community school that grew up out of the community and out of a community organizing effort. And they launched a community school strategy about 5 years ago. And so their initial response to the COVID pandemic was to ensure that 100% of their students had digital access. So that was step one for them. After they did that, they then went on to hold virtual meetings with 90% of their families. And then they also engaged in virtual town halls. They ended up, because schools closed and then schools went back into session, if you remember, this past spring. And what for El Puente, during that moment of closure, when they were distributing their the capacity for students to get online and make sure that students had the information they needed to know how to log on, when they did open back up virtually, they had 95% attendance of their students, which is huge during this moment. I'm sure most of you realize. And they were able to maintain daily attendance rates of above 90% all spring long. And they are continuing that level of attendance this fall. I want to share also this during the spring and into the summer, in addition to the town hall meetings, they had individual phone conversations with every one of their families to understand what their family's concerns were, what the specific needs were, and what their plans were for this coming fall in regard to teaching and learning, and what their concerns were if it was a hybrid approach or if it was a virtual approach, and what would their preferences be, so that as they planned for this year, they were planning with those students and families specific needs and concerns in mind. In addition to that, they also just paid attention to the social and emotional wellness of their families and their students. And so they provided social and emotional support. They provided support for COVID-19 relief for families that were suffering from the pandemic. And then they also focused on fun things. They had bingo nights. They had online debate. And then they orchestrated a highly produced prom for their students, really trying to maintain the community while simultaneously responding to the crisis. So I back into your question, Allison, to say that I think districts and states can help to support effective communication by investing in strategies that are focused on relationship building, like the community school strategy, like after school programs, like social and emotional strategies that are within the context of the everyday life of schools. But we have more effective communication when we have better relationships. And so we have to invest in that space.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sue. Those were really powerful examples, and I can actually see many people in the chat on the side asking follow-up questions. Where is this model district? So Hetty, thank you so much for providing the information to folks who want to learn more about El Puente. Karen, I'd love to hear from you as well about your insights into how states and districts can support schools in maintaining communication with families.
Sure, and Sue's examples were great. So it's just kind of in addition to that, one of the districts that I think is interesting is Phoenix Union High School District. And they pretty soon in the spring put into effect this every student every day, meaning that they attempt to connect with every single student every single day. Again, as Sue was saying, to understand what their needs are, what's happening, where are the challenges, what do they have, what do they need, and talking with people is the only way to communicate. Getting connected one by one. this is unprecedented. And so the need to understand what's happening in every single family is what has to happen. And that means listening. Systematic, strategic kind of thing. The system for how you're going to connect with everybody, providing resources and communications in multiple languages across multiple channels, where you see people using text messaging, emails, an online website, family liaisons, the liaisons with homeless students, every single avenue that they have, they're using to make sure that they can connect with families in whatever ways possible. So the second part of this, though, is it's two-way communication. It's not just getting stuff out to them, but it's definitely listening carefully, connecting, understanding not just what they need, but also how they prefer to communicate, because this isn't a one-time. So we are also seeing people have open office hours, setting up appointments to talk to people. I actually have been in conversations recently about teachers who are being contacted in the evening hours when students are trying to do a math problem and their parents are like, please help my student. It's this sort of relentless 24/7 in a way for teachers to really try to figure out how to support their families. IT help desks, sometimes supported by students, right? So that's another way that, taking the IT concerns and getting them sort of cordoned off so people can, that doesn't become the full, what they need from their teachers. That's important. Also, surveys, right? So Broward County, huge district. In the spring, they did a survey. I think it was in June, they did a survey and they got 65,000 responses. That is a huge number of responses. And that information coming back from their families helped them to create the systems that will best support them, understanding what they want. So the bottom line is asking what's working, what's not, and then taking action systematically to support every individual situation.
As a proud graduate of Broward County Public Schools, I'm always excited when someone gives Broward a shout out. Thank you so much. I have one more question for the both of you, and then I really want to open it up to the folks who have joined our session to ask the questions. So my last big question for you is about teachers. Karen, you touched on this a little bit, but with schools closed, many teachers are teaching remotely, something that they never expected to do and were never trained to do. And teachers are going to need technical support and professional development to effectively teach and assess students online. And that includes creating a positive virtual classroom culture. This is especially a concern in high poverty, underfunded districts, which were substantially less likely, according to recent research, to provide synchronous, that's live instruction, less likely to teach new material, more likely to do review, and less likely to monitor students' progress last semester. In the spring when schools first closed. So my question for both of you, and this time we'll start with Karen, what can states and districts do to support teachers during distance learning or support schools in supporting teachers? And are there any places that stand out as promising examples of places that are really supporting education?
It's a lot like, Maslow's hierarchy, right? So you want people are again, once students can get connected, so they have access. Supporting teachers is much the same. The support for teachers needs to be personalized. Every teacher needs something different. In some cases, the teacher needs home internet access and either doesn't have it or can't afford it. So we can't just figure that adults in the system have everything that they need. So that's the first thing, making sure that the adults have what they need to support their students. The second thing is teachers need flexibility. The rules about always on video or the attendance when I joined in, these are not helpful for teachers. These ultimatums or one size fits all, but finding ways to support each individual student with their particular circumstance means supporting every teacher to problem solve. So they need support for a whole different kind of planning, right? So if you remember back to reading instruction, there are things students can read independently with minimal support and with much more support. It's kind of the same thing. So helping teachers figure out what students can do independently, what they can do with minimal support online, and then what is most useful to do face-to-face. I was talking to a young woman the other day, middle school student who had participated in her first Socratic seminar, and it was done virtually, and she was super excited. It was a very cool thing. So helping teachers figure out what are those things that they can do, what are the most impactful things they can do online. Everybody has Zoom fatigue. That's the same with kids. It's a challenge. So the other thing I would say is social and emotional supports for teachers. So again, teachers are people too, and they also need to take care of, and I think as districts, as employers, need to think about the kinds of supports they have with their healthcare and that kind of thing. But the other kinds of things that are a little more kind of maybe focused in on professional development, it needs to be just in time. It can't be like the big one size fits all, because every teacher, again, is at a different place and they need something a little bit different. So just in time, optional segments, Tech Tuesdays, or 15 minutes for tech, or 10 minutes, or some short amount of time when people can get just that skill that they need is important. So personalization, helping students figure out what to do with their special needs students, with their English language learners. Those are very specific kinds of professional development they need. But I'll end with one example. The one thing that I think every district should have is a coach. Every school, hopefully, should have a coach. And this coach is the one that rolls up their sleeves alongside teachers and helps them problem solve. We have 264, I think, what we call Verizon Innovative Learning Schools. And these are schools that are funded with a device for every student, a data plan for every teacher and student as well, and then a coach in every school, and lots of sort of opportunities to learn. In those schools, they could transition to online learning much more fluidly than pretty much any schools that we saw anywhere. And it's because they had devices, because they had data plans, and because they had a coach. The coach was critical, rolling up their sleeves, helping students, helping teachers solve the individual challenges every single day.
Thank you so much, Karen. Sue, what would you like to add to that about how districts and states and schools can be supporting educators as they figure out distance learning?
Well, first, I just want to say, Karen, we're on the same page. So I might just reinforce a couple of things you said and give a couple of examples. One of the things I think, Karen, you implied, but I just want to implicitly state, that teachers have to be at the table in the conversations around the decisions that are being made and the planning that is happening. In far too many districts, unfortunately, decisions are being made without teachers at the table. And to your point, Karen, we have to understand almost at an individual level, or even at an individual level, what each individual teacher needs to be able to support learning at home. One of the other major issues that have been raised by teachers are their own issues around childcare, and being able to both teach and monitor their child's teaching, or take care of their children if they have much younger children. And so having teachers at the table, having them give feedback on the plans, making sure that the plans are being created with teacher input is essential. I would also say that the other element of this, and you mentioned this, Karen, is removing burdens from teachers and removing some of the expectations of what a teacher might be responsible for. And while we absolutely want to ensure that attendance is taken on a daily basis for students and ensuring that they are logging in and engaging in class, there are also strategies that can be put in place, technological innovations to help teachers be able to take attendance. We know, for example, there's a district in California called Golden's Plain in Central California, Fresno County, and they're currently now in the process of figuring out how can they automate some of the attendance taking so that the teachers can focus on learning. And then, to the point that someone raised just a moment ago in the chat, relationship building, which is at the center of learning and is essential in this moment. And so we have to balance these priorities and ensuring students are showing up, ensuring we're tracking the data, and support teachers to as much as possible. The other thing I would say is that partners have a role too. We have partners across the country that work with school districts that when school buildings closed, they were suddenly shut out of the work that they do, whether they're after-school program providers, whether they're peer-to-peer mentoring providers or otherwise. And a lot of these organizations are organizations that have expertise in youth development and social and emotional support. And so one particular nonprofit that Attendance Works partners with, called Center for Supportive Schools, quickly pivoted and recognized that they had principals that were suddenly, faced with the daunting task of supporting the social and emotional wellness of all their teachers, and not really sure about what to do, how to handle it, how to meet their teachers where they were at. So the Center for Supportive Schools took their best understanding of development and social and emotional healthy supportive listening, and they created toolkits for principals to help principals engage in creating feedback sessions with teachers, creating social and emotional wellness check with teachers, and then also just reminding the principals to create some fun opportunities for teachers to connect and build community. And so that's the last thing that I would close with in this regard, because Karen, you touched on so much of it, is that teacher-to-teacher support, teacher-to-teacher mentorship, creating opportunities for teachers to learn from each other, because they're all experimenting right now, they're all learning on the job. And some teachers are coming up with innovative and interesting strategies and practices. And so creating that space so that they can share and learn from one another, I think, is very important too.
Thank you so much, Sue. And I'm so glad both of you elevated teachers, bringing teachers to the table. Sue, I love that you talked about having districts and schools think about leveraging the amazing people who work as paraprofessionals and after-school teachers who, to go back to that amazing panel we had this morning, know the context. Those are often people who are the community, and they know what the students in their community need. We only have a few minutes left. Time always flies. So I think we have time for a few questions if anyone wants to type them into the chat, or if you're really eager, you know what, actually, because of time, let's do the chat. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in, and Sue and Karen and I can try to answer them.
I'll just jump in really quickly with one of the things I saw in the chat, and Jeff Strand asked about meeting the needs of students with disabilities, IEPs, virtually differentiated learning, behavioral support, social skills, etc. I put a resource in the chat to Educating All Learners Alliance, and that is a great website, a space where you can get lots of resources and examples of what to do with special needs kids. It's an alliance of multiple organizations, including Digital Promise, that are focused in on that. We've also been working on something around learner variability, really thinking about all of the various needs. And we have something called a learner variability navigator that I'll also put in the chat. And that has a whole host of resources or strategies. They are not designed for COVID and remote learning, but some of them might be applicable. But I think that the Educating All Learners Alliance is specifically related to virtual learning and home learning.
Thank you. And I see a question here about our youngest learners, something that is very much on my mind as I can hear my 4-year-old upstairs. Any thoughts you have about how schools and districts and states can support our youngest learners, our preschoolers and students in early childhood programs, some of which have moved online as well?
So I'll jump in just with a couple of thoughts that we have been working on at Attendance Works. And in particular, our focus has been on conversations with early education program providers about connecting with families and supporting families and delivering at-home instruction. And so what does it mean to provide families with the opportunities to stay connected with each other and the school program? What does it mean to provide families with resources to be able to facilitate at-home learning? And how can schools utilize online platforms or otherwise to facilitate at-home learning? We think it's much more about that than trying to teach, small children online.
Thank you both so much. I'm conscious of time, and I know that there are people who could ask you questions forever. Devon, if you're still there, would you mind putting up the last few slides that have the resources that we want to share with folks? While he's pulling that up, I'll just say that we were able to partner in the summer with Digital Promise to create a district advocacy guide related to digital learning. It's 10 questions that equity advocates can be asking their districts about how they're supporting students, particularly our most vulnerable students, as distance learning is happening. And so I put a link to that in the chat. And we also just published, I'll put a link in the chat as well, a state action guide. It's a 2-page fact sheet that includes actions that state leaders can take to support districts and schools in implementing many of the strategies you heard here today, along with some promising examples of states such as California that are doing things that we think other states could really model or could follow as a model. At 2:30, we can, I'll transition back to the main stage for a fireside chat with Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, which I'm so excited about. And then at 4 o'clock, Ed Trust President and CEO John King will be closing us out. And I hope you'll all stick around. I know that we all just talked about Zoom fatigue, but I know it's a real thing, but I really think that these are going to be amazing speakers, and I hope you'll join me back at the main stage for those last 2 parts of our Equity Matters Bootcamp. There we go. Thank you, Devon. You read my mind. My email address is there if you have any additional questions. Sue and Karen, if you want to put your contact information in the chat, or folks are welcome to reach out to me, and I will connect you with our amazing panelists. Thank you so much for joining us today. Okay, great. See everyone back at the main stage.